I never thought I'd be the woman telling her husband that he needed to either step up and raise another man's baby or get out of my life. But honestly, I don't regret how things played out, just how they ended up. I'm Amy, 32, and this is how I blew up my entire life without even meaning to. 5 years ago, I married Keith. He wasn't exactly what I'd pictured for myself. Kinda socially awkward, talked way too much about his computer programming job, and had this weird laugh that made people stare at restaurants. But he was stable, had a decent job, and looked at me like I hung the moon. Plus, he'd never even had a serious girlfriend before me, which meant no baggage and no comparing me to exes. We agreed early on that we didn't want kids. At least, I didn't want them then, and Keith went along with whatever I wanted. That should have been my first clue about our relationship. He never pushed back on anything. It was like dating a yes man sometimes, which gets old faster than you'd think. 3 years into our marriage, I started getting annoyed by little things. How he chewed his food, his collection of weird figurines in the home office, the way he'd interrupt conversations to explain something nobody asked about. Nothing major, just death by 1,000 paper cuts, you know? Meanwhile, my friends were posting about their exciting lives and relationships on social media. And I started wondering if I'd settled too quickly. That's when I got the idea about the vasectomy. I brought it up during dinner one night, super casual. It would be so much better for us, Keith. I hate being on birth control. It messes with my hormones. And it makes more sense for you to get a simple procedure than for me to keep dealing with side effects. He hesitated at first, which irritated me. I dunno, Amy. What if we change our minds someday? I rolled my eyes so hard I nearly saw my brain. We've talked about this for years. Neither of us wants kids. Are you suddenly changing your mind? I knew he wasn't. He just didn't like making permanent decisions. But I needed this from him. Needed to know he was actually committed to our plans. After a week of gentle pressure, okay, maybe not so gentle, he agreed. I scheduled the appointment myself and drove him there, waiting in the reception area while he got snipped. Afterward, he was in pain for days, and I played the dutiful wife, bringing him ice packs and his favorite snacks. Inside, though, I felt relieved, like I'd secured something important. Looking back, I realize I never actually wanted Keith to be the father of my children if I ever had any. I just didn't know it consciously at the time. All I knew was that the vasectomy felt like freedom. Freedom from worrying about accidents, freedom from a lifetime tied to someone who wasn't really my type. The irony is, I had no idea that this freedom would lead me straight into the biggest mess of my life. I wasn't planning to cheat. I definitely wasn't planning to get pregnant. But 3 months after Keith's surgery, I met someone who changed everything. My company hired outside contractors for this big renovation project, and that's when Jax walked into our office. He was younger than me, 28 to my 32, but carried himself with this confidence that made everyone notice when he entered a room. Unlike Keith, when Jax spoke, people actually wanted to listen. He had this vibe that screamed success, from his expensive watch to the way he directed his crew. I found out later, he owned the whole construction company and made 3 times what Keith did. The first time he came to my desk to ask about the plans for my department's space, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, that stomach-flipping excitement of attraction. We ended up talking for almost an hour, completely forgetting about the renovation plans. When he finally left, my coworker leaned over and whispered, "Girl, he was totally into you." And I pretended to be shocked, like the thought hadn't crossed my mind. That night at home, Keith told me about some new video game for 45 minutes straight, while I nodded and thought about Jax's smile. And for the first time in my marriage, I let myself wonder, what if I made a mistake? What if there was something better out there for me? What if I was meant for more than this comfortable but boring life? I didn't know then that I was about to find out exactly what more looked like, and that it would cost me everything I thought I wanted. 2 weeks after meeting Jax, I started staying late at work, like really late. I told Keith it was because of the renovation project needing my input, which wasn't completely a lie. What I didn't mention was how those meetings usually ended up with just Jax and me, going over plans that somehow always required us to sit very close together. The first time we crossed the line, it was so cliché I'd be embarrassed to tell anyone. We were alone in the conference room after everyone had left for the day. He reached over to point at something on the blueprint, his arm brushing against mine, and I swear the electricity between us was enough to power the whole building. When he looked at me, I knew exactly what was going to happen, and I didn't do a single thing to stop it. "You know I'm married, right?" I said after our first kiss. Not because I felt guilty, but because I wanted to make sure he understood the situation. He just smiled that confident smile. "That's not my problem, Amy, but is it yours?" I should have said yes. Instead, I pulled him back to me. After that, we fell into a routine. I'd tell Keith I had late meetings or girls' nights, and instead I'd be with Jax. Sometimes at his fancy downtown apartment, sometimes in his car, once even in the supply closet at work when we couldn't wait. The entire time, poor clueless Keith would text me things like, "Miss you," or "bringing home your favorite takeout." I'd leave Jax's place with his scent still on me and walk right into my house, kissing Keith's cheek with the same lips that had been all over another man hours earlier. Was it wrong? Absolutely. Did I care in the moment? Not even a little bit. Jax made me feel alive in ways Keith never had. He wasn't awkward or apologetic about anything. He took what he wanted and didn't ask permission. The contrast between them was laughable. Keith asking if the temperature in the house was okay for me, while Jax was bending me over his kitchen counter without a word. The physical stuff was incredible, but even more intoxicating was the risk. Every time I lied to Keith about where I was going, every fake work event or fictional girls' night, I got this rush that was almost better than the affair itself. I was getting away with something right under his nose, and the fact that he trusted me completely made it even more thrilling. One night, Jax and I got particularly careless. We'd had a few drinks at a bar near his place, and one thing led to another. When things got heated, he asked about protection, and I just whispered, "Don't worry about it." The look on his face, that mix of surprise and hunger, was worth whatever risk I was taking. Afterward, he casually handed me some cash and said, "For Plan B, get it tomorrow." That became our new normal. He'd finish inside me, then hand me money for the pill without a second thought. It should have felt demeaning, maybe, but there was something so powerful about how matter-of-fact he was about it all. Over the months, he probably spent close to $800 on those pills, which became a joke between us. "I should buy stock in the company at this point," he said once, and I laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world. Meanwhile, Keith and I barely touched each other anymore. I always had an excuse: headache, too tired, period, whatever. The few times we did have sex, I found myself closing my eyes and picturing Jax. Afterward, I'd feel this hollow emptiness, knowing I was living a lie, but too addicted to the excitement to stop. 4 months into my affair with Jax, my period was late. At first, I wasn't concerned. My cycle had always been irregular, and we'd been careful with the Plan B every time. But after 2 weeks, I bought a test just to ease my mind. When those 2 pink lines appeared, I didn't feel panic like I expected. Instead, there was this weird sense of inevitability, like somehow I'd known this was coming all along. I sat on the bathroom floor, staring at that positive test, and the strangest thought popped into my head. The universe wanted this to happen. It was ridiculous, I know. The universe didn't make me cheat on my husband. The universe didn't make me skip taking Plan B that one time when I was too tired and figured just once wouldn't matter. But in that moment, the idea that this pregnancy was somehow meant to be gave me a bizarre sense of peace. The real question was, what the hell was I going to do now? It took me exactly 3 hours to formulate a plan. Keith's vasectomy had been just over 6 months ago, and I knew from my obsessive Googling that sometimes they could fail. It wasn't common, but it happened. Just enough plausible deniability that I could work with. I started that very night. Keith was surprised when I initiated for the first time in months, but definitely not complaining. I made a whole production of it. Candles, lingerie, the works. When it came time, I begged him to finish inside me, saying I missed the feeling. The confusion on his face was priceless. This was the same woman who'd insisted he get a vasectomy to avoid exactly this scenario. But he was too caught up in the moment to question it. "Are you sure?" he asked, ever the cautious one. Yes, I breathed. You're snipped anyway, remember? Nothing can happen. Except something already had, and I needed to cover my tracks. For the next 2 weeks, I was the perfect wife. I cooked Keith's favorite meals, stopped criticizing his weird habits, and initiated sex almost every night, always insisting he finish inside me. The poor guy thought we were having some kind of second honeymoon. "What's gotten into you lately?" he asked one morning, looking happier than I'd seen him in months. I just smiled mysteriously, just remembering why I fell in love with you. The guilt should have eaten me alive. Sometimes, in the quiet moments when Keith would rest his hand on my stomach while we watched TV, I'd feel a twinge of it. But then I'd remind myself that this was for the best. Keith wanted to be a father someday. He'd admitted as much before reluctantly agreeing to the vasectomy. I was just giving him what he secretly wanted, even if the baby wasn't technically his. What he didn't know wouldn't hurt him, right? When I was about 6 weeks along, enough time to make the timing believable, I took another test while Keith was home. I made a show of looking shocked when I came out of the bathroom. "Keith," I said, voice trembling for effect, "I think you need to see this." The range of emotions that crossed his face when he saw that positive test nearly broke me. Confusion, disbelief, and then, heartbreakingly, pure joy. "But how?" he whispered, eyes wide. I shrugged, playing innocent. "I guess your vasectomy failed? It happens sometimes, according to the internet." He pulled me into his arms, and I felt his tears on my shoulder. "I can't believe it," he kept saying. "We're going to be parents." The next day he called his mother, who screamed so loudly with excitement that I could hear her through the phone. She'd always wanted grandchildren and had been visibly disappointed when we announced our child-free plans years ago. "It's a miracle," she told Keith. "God has blessed you both." Yeah, a miracle named Jax, I thought, but smiled and pretended to be just as surprised and thrilled as everyone else. Meanwhile, I was ghosting Jax's texts. I couldn't face telling him yet, unsure how he'd react. Finally, after a week of silence, I agreed to meet him at his place. "What's going on with you?" he asked, immediately trying to pull me in for a kiss. I stepped back. "I'm pregnant." The look on his face could have frozen hell over. "What do you mean you're pregnant? We've been using Plan B." "Well, I guess it didn't work," I said, trying to sound casual while gauging his reaction. He paced his living room like a caged animal. "Did you even take them every time? Because this shouldn't have happened." "Of course I did," I lied, feeling defensive. "Look, I believe everything happens for a reason. The universe wanted this baby to exist." That was when I saw a side of Jax I hadn't encountered before. His face hardened and he laughed. Not the warm, sexy laugh I was used to, but something cold and dismissive. "The universe? Are you kidding me right now?" He ran a hand through his hair. "What about your husband? Didn't you say he had a vasectomy?" I nodded, feeling suddenly small. "I'm telling him it failed." Jax stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "So you're tricking him into raising my kid? That's your grand plan?" When he put it that way, it sounded terrible, but I wasn't backing down. He wants children. He'll be a good father. "And what about me? Did you think I'd want to play daddy too? Is that why you forgot to take the pill?" His voice rose with each question. "No, I didn't plan this, Jax. But now that it's happening, you can count me out," he cut me off. "We were fucking, Amy. That's it. If I wanted a kid with you, I wouldn't have spent nearly $1,000 on Plan B." His words stung more than I expected. Some naive part of me had hoped he'd be excited, that maybe we could eventually be a family. Instead, he was looking at me like I was trying to trap him. The argument escalated until we were both shouting. Somehow, in that twisted way that intense emotions sometimes work, we ended up in his bed one last time. The sex was different, angry, almost desperate. Afterward, he turned away from me immediately. "You should go," he said quietly, "and don't expect me to be involved in this. I mean it." I left his apartment feeling hollow but still convinced I was on the right path. Keith would love this baby. We would be a family. It would all work out in the end. I had no idea how spectacularly wrong I was. The next 5 months were a masterclass in deception. Keith threw himself into preparing for fatherhood with an enthusiasm that should have melted my heart but instead just added to my growing anxiety. He read every baby book he could find, converted our spare room into a nursery, and even started a college fund before I'd finished my first trimester. "Do you think he'll have your eyes?" Keith would ask, staring at my growing belly with pure adoration. "Maybe," I'd answer noncommittally, changing the subject as quickly as possible. His mother was even worse, constantly speculating about which family traits the baby would inherit. "The men in our family all have that distinctive nose," she'd say, pointing to Keith's slightly upturned feature. "And our hairline, strong genes there." Each comment was like a tiny needle of guilt, but I pushed through it. I'd come too far to back down now. Meanwhile, Jax had completely ghosted me after our last encounter. His number was disconnected, and when I drove by his apartment building, the concierge informed me he'd moved out. A coworker mentioned he'd relocated his business to another city. The message was clear. He wanted nothing to do with me or this baby. As my belly grew, I started having moments of panic about what would happen when the baby arrived. I spent hours researching how mixed-race babies sometimes don't show their father's features right away. I convinced myself that I could explain away any obvious differences as taking after my distant relatives, or some genetic quirk. The doctor's appointments were the worst. Keith insisted on coming to every single one, asking a million questions and beaming with pride when we heard the heartbeat. Once, the doctor mentioned something about genetic testing, and I nearly had a panic attack right there on the examination table. "We don't need that," I said quickly. "Neither of us has any family history of genetic issues." The doctor gave me an odd look, but didn't push it. Keith, ever trusting, agreed without question. By my third trimester, the lies had become so tangled that I sometimes lost track of what I'd told to whom. Keith's friends threw him a dad shower, where they gifted him tiny baseball gloves and father-son matching shirts. His mother knitted blankets with the family name. All while I smiled and accepted their excitement, knowing it was built on a foundation of lies. But the alternative, telling the truth, seemed impossible. I'd gone too far, committed too deeply to this charade, and despite everything, a part of me truly believed it could work. Keith would love this baby no matter what, right? And Jax was out of the picture completely. Once the baby was born, we'd just move forward as a family, and eventually, the truth wouldn't even matter anymore. The night before my due date, Keith held me close in bed, his hand on my enormous belly. "I never thought I could be this happy," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me a family." I swallowed hard, tears pricking my eyes. For a brief moment I considered confessing everything, coming clean and begging for forgiveness. But then the baby kicked, and Keith's face lit up with such pure joy that I couldn't bring myself to shatter his world. "I love you," I said instead, the words feeling both true and like the biggest lie I'd ever told. My water broke at 3 a.m. that night. Everything happened in a blur after that. The rush to the hospital, the increasingly painful contractions, Keith holding my hand through it all, looking terrified but determined to be strong for me. "You're doing great, Amy," he kept saying. "Our baby is almost here." Our baby. The phrase echoed in my head as I pushed, screamed, and finally delivered the child I'd been carrying for 9 months. The delivery room went completely silent, I knew immediately. Even before I saw the baby, I knew from the expressions on the nurses' faces, from the doctor's carefully neutral tone, from the way Keith's hand suddenly became limp in mine. "It's a beautiful baby boy," the doctor announced, holding up my son. My beautiful, clearly mixed-race son. Keith stood frozen, staring at the child that was obviously not his. His mother, who had insisted on being in the delivery room, gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. "There must be some mistake," she whispered, looking between Keith and the baby with growing horror. But there was no mistake. Just the truth, finally exposed in the most undeniable way possible. Keith didn't say a word. He simply walked out of the delivery room while his mother followed, leaving me alone with my newborn son and a room full of uncomfortably silent medical staff. I held my baby close, tears streaming down my face, not just for the beautiful life I'd created, but for the absolute disaster I'd made of everything else. When they wheeled me to my recovery room hours later, Keith was waiting there, his face a mask of controlled anger I'd never seen before. "How long?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. "Keith, I can explain." "How long?" he repeated, louder this time. I flinched, clutching the baby closer. About 7 months, I admitted. It wasn't supposed to happen. It was just a fling that got out of control. Keith laughed bitterly. A fling. While I was recovering from a vasectomy, you insisted I get. I didn't force you to get that vasectomy, I shot back defensively. You agreed to it. His eyes widened at my audacity. Because I trusted you. Because I thought we were making decisions together for our future. And all that time, you were sleeping with someone else? I looked down at my son, his perfect little face peaceful in sleep, unaware of the chaos around him. Keith, I know you're angry, but can we talk about this later? I just gave birth. No, we're talking about this now, he said, his voice shaking. I spent the last 6 months preparing to be a father, thinking this was my child. I called my mother crying with happiness when you told me you were pregnant. Do you have any idea what you've done to me? I felt tears sliding down my cheeks. I made a mistake, but this baby isn't a mistake. He deserves a father who loves him, and you would be amazing at that. Don't throw everything away because of one error in judgment. One error? Keith laughed, but it was hollow. Amy, you manipulated me into getting a permanent procedure, cheated on me for months, lied to my face every single day, and tried to trick me into raising another man's child. That's not one error. That's who you are. His words hit like a physical blow. So what are you saying? Keith walked to the window, staring out at nothing. I'm saying I'm done. I'll be filing for divorce as soon as possible. You can't be serious, I said, panic rising in my chest. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Keith, please, we can work through this. He turned to face me, and I was shocked to see tears streaming down his face. There's nothing to work through. You've shown me exactly who you are, and it's not someone I can spend my life with. But the baby is not my responsibility, he cut me off. He deserves better than starting life in a lie. So do I. With that, he walked out of the hospital room, leaving me alone with my newborn son and the wreckage of my life. The divorce was quick and brutal. Keith had evidence of my affair. Apparently, he'd had suspicions for months, but had been too trusting to act on them. His lawyer was merciless, using my deception about the vasectomy and pregnancy as leverage for a settlement that left me with barely enough to get by. Everyone took his side. Friends I'd had for years stopped returning my calls. His mother, who had once treated me like a daughter, blocked my number. Even my own parents were coldly disappointed, and my mother asking how she had raised someone capable of such deception. I moved into a small apartment with my son Elijah. Single motherhood was nothing like I'd imagined. Exhausting, isolating, and constant. Without Keith's income, I was struggling financially for the first time in years. Maternity leave ended too quickly, and I found myself juggling daycare costs, formula, and rent while running on 3 hours of sleep. After 6 months of this new reality, I decided to try dating again. How hard could it be? I was still young, still attractive despite the baby weight I couldn't seem to lose. I downloaded Tinder and created a profile, mentioning Elijah because I figured honesty was the best policy going forward. The responses were a wake-up call. Single mom? Hard pass. No offense, but I'm not raising another dude's kid. You're cute, but seem like damaged goods. Too much baggage. One guy actually told me I had a salvage title, like a car that's been in an accident. The few men who did agree to meet me would invariably ghost after the first date when they realized how limited my availability was. One actually said to my face, "I was hoping you'd be one of those moms whose parents take the kid all the time, you know?" Meanwhile, I stalked Keith's social media like it was my job. 6 months after our divorce, he'd started his own tech company. 8 months in, he'd posted pictures with a new woman, younger than me, no kids, laughing at something he said. By our divorce's 1-year anniversary, they were engaged. The final blow came when I ran into them at a restaurant while I was out with Elijah. I was exhausted, wearing yoga pants and a stained t-shirt, while she was glowing in a sundress, her hand resting on Keith's arm. They looked happy, genuinely, effortlessly happy, in a way Keith and I never had. When Keith spotted me, his expression shifted from shock to pity in seconds. He said something to his fiancée, then walked over to my table. "Amy," he said formally, "how are you?" "Great," I lied, painfully aware of the baby food in my hair. "Really great." His eyes moved to Elijah, who was happily smashing crackers into the high chair. Something flickered across his face. Regret, maybe, or just acknowledgement. "He's beautiful," Keith said quietly. "I hope you're both doing well." "We are," I said, forcing a smile. "And congratulations on your engagement. She seems nice." "She is," he said simply, and the unspoken comparison hung in the air between us. "Take care, Amy." I watched him walk back to his table, to his new life that didn't include me or my mistakes. And for the first time, I truly understood what I'd thrown away. That night, after putting Elijah to bed, I scrolled through old photos of Keith and me from happier times. I thought about how differently everything could have turned out if I'd just been honest, about not wanting children with him, about my dissatisfaction, about all of it. For one crystalline moment, I saw myself clearly. Not as the victim of circumstance I'd painted myself to be, but as the architect of my own destruction. I had manipulated and lied to someone who had truly loved me, all because I was too selfish and cowardly to be honest. The clarity didn't last. By morning, I was back to telling myself that Keith had been too boring, that our marriage was doomed anyway, that everything had worked out for the best, because now I had Elijah. The familiar comfort of blaming others settled back around me like an old blanket. But sometimes, in the quiet moments when Elijah is sleeping and I'm alone with my thoughts, that brief flash of self-awareness returns. In those moments, I wonder if I'll ever have the courage to truly face what I've done. Or if I'll spend the rest of my life running from the truth, that I didn't just lose a husband. I destroyed a good man who deserved better than what I gave him. And no amount of justification can change that simple, devastating fact.